Okay, cool. All right. So sorry about that. Sorry for interrupting
No,
your guys's intros.
You're
Um,
good. I just hope my
so
absolutely
audio is
not your fault.
better. Is
no,
my
it's
better?
better
Is
now.
my
It's
audio
better
better,
now.
chat?
Yeah.
Good, good, good.
Okay. Awesome. All right.
Chat,
So
am I better? Oh, sorry.
yes, they think you're better as well. All right. So let's open it up. Since you guys gave your opening statements, you guys can just begin with your talk, I guess. So
Perfect.
Cool. So, Rose, I had a question for you. I've watched you talk with a couple of people, but I haven't really ever had a chance to hear you talk about self-defense situations before. I wanted to ask you about another popular case that a lot of people are familiar with. What are your thoughts on the Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Yeah, I think he's a murderer. I think he should be in prison. I think what he did was awful. I think he came with bad intentions. I mean, you don't just show up to a gun at like a place like that, and like that. In my opinion, that's like inciting violence. You're showing up like he thinks he's like this vigilante figure. Now, obviously, the people attacking him, I don't agree with that. I don't know much about the situation of the first person. The second person like attacked him with like a skateboard. At that point, I think it was just because he shot somebody else and in his eyes, there was like an active gunman. He was trying to prevent him from shooting anyone else. I just think that in that situation, I mean, when you're bringing a gun to that place, if he's not going to be charged for murder, at the very least, he should. He definitely was disrupting some peace there. He caused a lot of disruption. I don't think he should have just gone off away like he did. Maybe that was the case. Like if you look at the way the laws were written, maybe it was technically self-defense by that law, but I do not agree with that definition. I think that Kyle Rittenhouse was definitely in the wrong.
Okay, so just wanted to kind of clarify that because I don't really know a lot about your, political opinions on this topic. So I wanted to kind of like see if there was some inconsistency there. I'm like, you mentioned before that you're pretty right leaning on a lot of things. So it's interesting to kind of look at some of the other options. Now, I want to try and like get on the same level in terms of terminology here, because I feel like you are using a lot of really weighted language to try and like make your argument stronger than it is on the basis of saying things like murder instead of like, homicide. We draw these legal definitions pretty clearly in every state, but obviously every state's different. Very few things fall under like the purview of capital murder or like a federal crime, but very, very few instances of self-defense typically like are viewed within the context of murder. Murder usually requires some kind of like premeditation or malice on behalf of the person who's committing the act. So like the term murder is like obviously not the right one to use if you're talking about someone who's been like who's used violent self-defense as a means to like escape a sexual assault. Now, you used the word you used a word genuinely there in your initial definition. Now, how would you go about measuring whether or not someone is genuinely afraid for their life when they're being like attacked by someone and sexually assaulted?
Yeah, so that's the thing is I understand that there's nuance here, and a lot of times like you're not always able to tell. But I would say that like a lot of instances, I feel like there's a worrying problem in society where people just, oh well, I'm afraid, that means I can shoot. Oh, this person looks weird. This person's a bit scary to me. It's like, for instance, like a cop will go like dock somebody, or a cop will go to somebody and like they don't put their hands up in the air. Maybe they're like autistic, or maybe they just like they like just because they don't have their hands in the air, the cop automatically assumes they're about to pull a gun at somebody and they shoot them. So many times that results in like deaths that could have easily been prevented if the cops didn't automatically resort to shooting someone. I feel like that's the same case here, obviously not to that extreme. I feel like a lot of times people just like assume the worst, where it's like a lot of times in these situations, they can be very scary, but they don't often lead to like murder. So I feel like a lot of times like you have to use your best judgment. I understand that there's a lot of utility to be like, well, okay, this woman feels like she's in danger. We need to have protective legislation to prevent her from like being punished if she is acting in genuine need that she thinks she's protecting herself. I get that argument a lot. And so I can sympathize with that. And I feel like that's important. But at the same time, I do worry a lot that there's like a lot of like fear. And sometimes that fear is like misplaced, because there are probably some situations out there where it's like, a woman might assume the worst, and that might not be the case in that situation. So I would I would very much caution to like withhold using lethal or violent force unless you are absolutely sure that like something horrible is eminently going to happen.
I'd say that being sexually assaulted is, in most people's objective opinion, like a horrible, traumatic, and potentially deadly thing to experience. And if not deadly, potentially debilitating, either like physically or psychologically. And to frame it as if you can like draw an analogous comparison to the way that police brutality is like viewed and, you know, kind of the standards that we draw for our police force and like versus the standard that we would hold a individual who's being like violently assaulted to, it doesn't seem like those lines should be very like analogous with one another. It seems like you should be able to exercise quite a bit more you know, charitability in the regard to whether or not a person who's being like sexually assaulted feels a threat for their life versus like a police officer who's gunning down a like a mentally disabled person because they feel a little antsy, I think is like the parallel you drew. So, I mean, wouldn't you agree that like the vast majority of cases where someone's being sexually assaulted, especially violently, are much more likely to fall like way on the other end of the extreme than the spectrum than like what the scenario you just laid out?
I would definitely agree. I think if you look at a bunch of cases, the police are probably much more likely bad faith actors here. I just use it as an example of like,
it's not even about being bad faith actors. It's about it's about where we draw like standards in society and how we hold like how we apply those standards to different groups of people. Obviously, like police have a state sanctioned monopoly on violence. We don't necessarily all have to like it, but we all have to understand it and live with it. And with that comes like a pretty complicated relationship with the population. But to compare it to the way that an individual might defend themselves in presumably like a violent attack, let's not act like the vast majority of the sexual assaults that are being like that you're referring to here are like this passive act where both people are safe, but maybe there's some kind of consent problem. This isn't like an issue of misaligned consent. This is a issue of violent sexual assault and what level of like autonomy and what level of like self-defense someone can assert to escape that kind of situation. I don't think it's very reasonable to hold them to the same standard that you do a police officer.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, I think police officers should be held to a higher standard, right? Because when that's their job, like, a police officer goes doing their job knowing that, you know, they'll have to make tough calls like that. Whereas, like, a woman just, like, walking down the street is just trying to live her life. And it's definitely not the same thing. I just use that, like, as a reference. Like, I don't see them the same way. I just use it as an example to prove that, like, there are cases where people act in these violent ways where it's not always sure that there is, like, this huge threat to them. So I'm just scared because it's like, it's kind of like the guilty or innocent until proven guilty thing. It's like if we're like 99% sure that someone is like a murderer, I don't like, you have to be like 100% sure before you put them in a prison because like the fact that we could
someone is sexually assaulting you, I'd say you're 100% sure of their intentions. You've got to like, please like try to keep in mind that I'm trying to approach this from a place of good faith, but the conversation, like you were clearly referring to women who had defensive tools that would really only ever be usable in a situation where they were being physically assaulted. You characterized those women as evil. You said they should be in prison for life. I'm not trying to like be a dick here, but I'm also not trying to let you off the hook for these things just because you said you take them back.
So first of all, I want to say, what I'm referring to here is more of a sudden, like, if a woman is, like, in public, this is, like, before the situation. If, like, a woman suspects that, like, a man is, like, about to, like, attack her and stuff, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, we have to have, like, very clear definitions just because, like, I don't want it to ever be in a situation where it's, like, a guy catcalls and then all of a sudden someone thinks it's, like, okay to, like, shoot them. I know it's, like, not what people are saying, but, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have to have, like, clear set lines and, like, when that's okay. But when it comes to that tweet, obviously, I had a talk with Hunter Avalon yesterday. I don't agree with that. I think I was like very hyperbolic. It's part of the reason I deleted the tweet. I don't even know why. I feel like that was really like, I shouldn't have gone as extreme as I did when I said that. I don't believe they deserve life in prison. I think that was a stupid thing for me to say. I would say though that I don't like the device. I think it just serves to hurt people. And I don't think that that's really going to help anybody. It just serves as like a weird like revenge fantasy. And it's like, I don't think that's really going to get the results that people want it to. And I don't think that's the path we should be taking.
First of all, I'm pretty sure that that device that you're referring to is like an essay countermeasure that they've talked about deploying in some like less developed countries where sexual violence among the among the local populations is a lot more difficult to report, a lot more difficult to counteract, and it's a lot more difficult to like hold anyone accountable for. Even in the United States, rape is an incredibly hard charge to prove. There's minimal physical evidence. There's usually a delay between the act itself and the report of the act, if the act is reported at all. To treat it like this is something that like is being talked about, like being used on a widespread basis, is just like a silly straw man. And this is like kind of the whole criticism that I have of like using this language, like, oh, this is evil, these women belong in prison, when like clearly you haven't really thought through like the vast majority of cases where you would see something like this deployed, where you would see something like this even like offered to a population. And you're using these like incredibly charged, like this incredibly charged language to demonize entire groups of people because you haven't really thought it through. And like you're basically saying as much right here. So, I mean, I guess I should just ask, like, what is your position now? Can you outline your position now for me?
Okay, so I think more so that I just don't think those devices should be allowed. Obviously, I don't believe in like life, and that was silly of me to say. Like, I don't think that the woman should like be locked up in prison. I just think that it's not a helpful device and it shouldn't be allowed. And also, I think some experts have said like that this isn't even like helpful. It's just going to result to the man retaliating against violence to the woman that has this device. So it's just going to cause more harm. And that's really what my stance is. I just worded it in a really stupid way that made me look terrible. But really, I just feel like this is just going to cause more harm to people when they think that they're helping. And I feel like that's a problem. Like, we should be doing more to prevent these situations. We should be doing more to actually help people, not just add hurt to the world where it doesn't need to be.
This would be like a fine way to explain things if you hadn't also called that other young woman who was posting pictures of like a floral print knife an evil piece of shit. It was like pretty immediately prior to you posting this thing that went viral, but it was what initially kicked off our conversation. The young woman who posted
remember
about,
that.
like, with a little. Okay, well, the tweets are still like the tweets are still on my feed from yesterday. But
I'm looking. I'm gonna look for it. Hold on.
Okay, so let me just bring you up to speed. The woman in question, you retweeted a woman in question who had a little like self-defense choker bracelet and a little picture of like a floral print knife. Probably going a little like Mall Ninja Jane Wiki about the whole thing, but certainly not like something I would call an evil piece of shit. Clearly just like an individual that wants to be able to defend themselves if they're being like attacked violently by someone much larger than them. There's like no rational way that that kind of object would be used, except for in like an extreme case of self-defense. So
yeah, sorry.
I'm just trying to understand like where you go about making these like characterizations of people before you like tweet out these super inflammatory things, because it seems like you actively want to court attention and court controversy, but you are in a position now where like you did not think through what you were saying, and suddenly you have like the most ratioed tweet of all time on your hands. It's like last time I checked, I think you had 0 likes to almost 1 million total like likes on the retweets criticizing it. It was actually pretty incredible. But I feel like this is more a deflection of those criticisms than it is like a sincere change of opinion.
Yeah, I've sat down, obviously with the amount of criticism I received, I've sat down and thought. So I found the tweet that you're talking about. So I do remember this. It looks like a picture, maybe I'm wrong. It looks like a picture where someone's like kind of like choking or like attacking this person. And so this person is basically talking about the brutal ways that she wants to like attack these people in the case that she quote unquote needs to do so. I just feel like it worries me. I see this happening. It's like
it's a little cringy. It's a little Mall Ninja. It's a little like Jane Wick murder fantasy. Is it someone who's like fearful for their safety, or is it someone who's like evil and a piece of shit and needs to be attacked on Twitter by people who are seeking to be public figures?
I don't think that. I mean, I've seen this so many. I do not think we should be normalizing this culture where people are tweeting out their revenge fantasies where they want to murder people. I think that that's like really weird and like kind of scary. It's like I understand like the man is just like a piece of shit and evil for doing the stuff that he's doing. But I just feel like that's also like, very cruel. And I just don't understand like why someone would feel this. I mean, well, I guess I understand why someone would feel this way. I just feel like I don't know.
What I'm
And
trying to
also when you're
communicate to you
fantasizing,
here, look, what I'm trying to communicate to you here isn't really as much that like I think that you're a bad person or you need to like, get off the internet or anything like that. You seem very, very driven to be a part of the conversation, very like for
yeah.
better or worse, you want to offer your opinions. And it seems
Mhm.
like those opinions most of the time from what I've watched your conversation with Destiny, your conversation with Vosh, your conversation with
Mhm.
Star, and your conversation with Hunter now. And like the majority of the time, like the running theme seems to be that like you want to express your opinion, but you haven't really thought it through. And you use really, really charged language to talk about or like, villainize entire huge groups of people. And then when pressed on it a little bit, you have to caveat it in 1,000 different ways that reveal that you really haven't like given much thought to the position itself. And you more so sound like you're trying to score interesting sound bites. Is that like a fair
Uh,
criticism to you?
I would say when it comes to trans issues, this is something that like actually impacts me directly a lot. So like when it comes to trans stuff, I'd like to think that I know at least a little bit about the things that impact me. When it comes to other issues, like I'll admit maybe I'm not like the most educated. But like, I'm willing to learn if I say something that's wrong and like they correct me. Like, I want to try to like, yeah, like, be willing to learn from that. But I just, I mean,
I
I
would
typically
maybe
focus on the trans stuff.
Yeah, and like obviously that's fine. I don't think that like anybody is going to stay in one specific lane, and I don't think that even if you're talking just about the trans stuff that it's like any better to use incredibly charged language and divisive rhetoric about something that's like close to you and personal to you. If anything, it's probably just as bad as like weighing in on subjects you're totally ignorant about and villainizing entire groups of people because you are responding to like criticisms about your lived experience, at least in the other case. But I mean, you're still in a position where like you clearly want to be part of these conversations, but you see how much you can hurt people and how much you can like drive the wrong kind of attention to yourself by making these kinds of statements without thinking them through. So like I'm trying to understand like where your actual position is because it kind of feels like your position is just going to kind of change based on like what you need to be like the like optically the best. You
I
really like have an opinion on like self-defense that like you're going to stand by, or is it just like entirely situation to situation, but these women are still evil? Because I'm really having a hard time.
Okay, first of all, I don't go into situations like I don't like spend a lot of time like planning like, oh, what's going to be the most optically best thing for me to say. Like obviously I want to appeal to like, what I think is the best argument to make, like I think anyone does, but I don't like sit there and like lie about my positions or something. I think that's weird to claim or something.
I didn't say you
I
lied about them. I
Okay,
said you
fair,
haven't
fair.
thought them through. Okay, which just is to say that like if someone can push you off of a position that is like so incredibly strong, like that you should have to have such incredibly strong beliefs on to make the kind of statement that you did in the first place. Obviously, like the statement, these people are evil. This isn't like this person deserves to be in prison. This person's an evil piece of shit. It just doesn't sound like those statements come from a place of very much conviction when one conversation with Hunter Avalon and like one viral tweet with like a lot of criticisms can make you change your mind, but not in any way that you can like really articulate.
Okay, first of all, it's like 390,000 people liking a tweet and like constant, like my timeline yesterday was like filled with like hate comments. Okay, it wasn't just like a little thing; it was a lot. Okay, if that tweet had not gotten any attention, we probably wouldn't have had all the conversations. I probably wouldn't have thought about it as much as I did yesterday. So
If I
when you're talking
can,
about that,
I do have a question. So
yeah, go for it.
you brought up that being trans. I guess I'm trying to understand. You brought up being trans into this conversation, and I was just trying to understand how that is related to the conversation itself. I guess.
Um, I don't think it's necessarily, I just mentioned it because he was talking about like my debates with other people and like the rhetoric being applied. And so I was basically saying that in like those debates, I typically focus on a lot of stuff that impacted me personally.
Okay.
So when, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I was trying to get by with when I said that.
Okay.
And that's fair enough. Like I don't expect that like every issue you should have like an entire like dissertation written on it just to talk on it. I'm not suggesting that you should have to like sit down and like study a tweet for its content and every angle of it before you put it out, but like to use such extreme language and to characterize such like obvious fear-based responses as like evil, it seems like you are doing a lot more harm than good in terms of like the exact kind of rhetoric that you're saying is a problem. You say that like this glorification of violence by this woman is like a problem and that's why you retweeted her and called her an evil piece of shit, but isn't calling someone an evil piece of shit like just as divisive and problematic? Like can't you see how you're kind of like feeding into and perpetuating that cycle instead of empathizing with people who feel like threatened?
Okay, two things I'll say. One, I can see that. Two, though, I do think saying like someone is an evil piece of shit is a lot different from saying like writing out, like, do you want me to read the tweet? Because I can read the tweet about what this woman said.
I mean, I don't really care if you read the tweet or not. I've read it. I know what it says, but
okay, I just wanted
was talking
for the
to you
people
about your characterization of her as an evil piece of shit. You can read the tweet if you want.
Okay, I want to read the tweet for context. Okay, she said, quote, "I bought these 2 items to keep on me for walks. If I have to use either of them, the other person won't leave the scene alive. I'll either internally decapitate them with a bracelet or aim for the resend dagger at the jugular, then the eyes. I don't play. I might buy this now too." Like when I read that, like that seems like so. Ugh.
What are the the pictures of the items? It's like a choker bracelet. I mean, bracelet that you could only ever possibly use. Like the picture that's even being used to advertise it. A large man is on top of a small woman and she's using it as a self-defense item. The other item is like a finger length knife that you could only deploy against someone who's like physically on top of you. I think that like I stressed in that initial exchange that like if I have to use them is the pretty key piece of terminology, like piece of phraseology there that's driving the entire sentence and is like removing all of the like moral weight that you're assigning to this person by calling them evil. They're clearly speaking from like a little bit of a cringy over the top place, but like a place of like speaking of a self-defense. So like I don't understand. Like, go ahead.
I do have a question. It's for Portland. Is your primary issue with Rose's tone or with her substance? Because it seems like that you are sometimes you're expressing distaste with her tone, right? That's kind of what I'm getting here.
Well, I feel like sorry, I felt like that was like the response to the response about like the criticism of the substance. The criticism of the substance was the tweet itself, and her response was to refer to like the tone of the tweets that she was like responding to. Okay. And that's like, kind of where the criticism falls apart for me is like you're criticizing someone for their tone being like too violent or too like, glorifying of these concepts. But when you call them like an evil piece of shit or expressing these feelings like based on their tone, like your tone is arguably much worse. You're condemning this person because you think that they're like their self-defense response is too extreme. So
So I think like I said, I really thought about this. I spent a lot of hours yesterday really thinking about this. So that's why I'm coming into this conversation. Like some people may see it as backpedaling, though. It's just yesterday having to deal with all the stuff I did made me really think a lot of things. So I really thought about it. And I feel like a lot of my reaction comes less so from like the defense. Because if there's a situation where like genuinely speaking, it's needed to protect somebody, I'm willing to be sympathetic to that case and be like, okay, I think my issue is like the idea of people like kind of like glorifying or having like this weird like justice. Like I see so many people online talk about all the stuff that they just want to, the nasty like evil thing or the violence they want to commit against these people for doing the things that they do. And I don't feel like that feels right. I feel like the best like kind of like response to these things is like, okay, this was bad. Like I feel terrible for this. I was just trying to protect myself, but you know, this is like what I had to do. I feel really terrible for it. I feel like that's like the empathetic, like probably better way to look at it. Instead, I'm seeing people basically like talking about how they want to do it. And it's like, to me, if someone is tweeting about how much they want to do something, if they actually wind up doing that thing in the future, it's going to make me question more if it was really justified or if this person was looking for an excuse to do something. If they're constantly talking about how much they want to do something so bad. Like if somebody says, I want to commit this horrible act, and then they do it later, you know, I just feel like tweeting that they want to do it makes me question.
There was never any point, like the initial, those tweets, like I think if you look at our exchange, you'll see like there's no point where she expresses like the desire to use these things. It's all couched in the language of like, if I have to. It's a little bit extreme, but only thing she's like qualified this whole situation with is like, if I have to use these items. And that's like my whole point is you're kind of alluding to what she's not saying and ignoring what she is saying. And you're using that as like your, you know, smoking gun for like, obviously she's like got this violent like desire to enact this behavior on people, like to stab somebody or something like that. And that's just like not indicated anywhere in what she's saying. And like, if anything, it's more like, you know, the kind of thing that you would make a prescription for if someone is like horribly evil. We don't want those kinds of people, right? So those people should obviously be like removed from society somehow. They should be put in jail, like you said. They should have some sort of like, you know, means taken to like remove them from the threat they present to the general population. But like, this isn't a person who's talking about like wanting to do something. This is a person who's talking about what they'll do if they have to. I think that pretty radically alters the context.
Okay, I would say, like, obviously, if I call someone an evil piece of shit, that probably isn't very productive, and it's probably very emotionally charged. It's not the best argument to make, and I probably should, like, sit and think more. I mean, these tweets kind of come from, like, a split-second decision, and news are typically not the best. I would say, though, in these situations, I feel like if someone is going to be that detailed in these specific ways that they want to harm somebody, I'm not going to trust that person's judgment on how they think it's justified, because, like, a lot of the time, these people are probably going to take something that isn't, you know, I mean, I can't speak for this person. I just know that I feel like this promotes a culture of wanting more people to do these things. And I think the ideal scenario is these things should only happen in like, there's no other option, like worst case scenario. I think that's the healthy way to view it. And I think that the way that a lot of people view it online is very unhealthy, and it scares me. It worries me. But then people see that and think that I'm like pro rape or something, which I'm not. And it's weird. So I don't know what to say to that.
I do have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So
dude, you're fine.
Yeah. So I guess I would ask Rose, do you think that the idea of being, the idea of feeling hesitant in a violent situation might prevent people from defending themselves? I feel that oftentimes, and you'll see like oftentimes women are socialized to actually be like people pleasers and often not fight back when things are really getting bad for them, right? So do you think maybe there's some value in like taking some of that stigma away, removing some of that boundary, that hesitation in defending yourself and advocating for yourself in a situation like that?
I see what you're saying. I would say so, but in my eyes, that's like one extreme, and this is like the other extreme. Like, I think there's a way to have that conversation without tweeting out like revenge fantasies on how you want to brutally like murder somebody or kill somebody for not using the word murder. I understand what you're saying. I do think there is value. Like, I think that if there's a societal push, I think there probably is, like that women feel like they shouldn't defend themselves or aren't able to. That's probably really bad, and I don't support that. I just think that, you know, there's a healthy in between here where it's like you can have like wanting to defend yourself, but like make good judgment on how warranted or when the right time to do so is. And I feel like this is just like a
have
lot
a
of times
follow-up
I see
question as
people.
well.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a question for you that says she uses the term "these things." It may be helpful for Portland and the audience to describe exactly what these things are. So we're talking about an anti-rape device, or is the criticism that the topic, in the topic more general, is an anti-rape device equivalent to brutal murder? So I guess first, they're asking you to talk about what, when you say these things, what exactly you're speaking about. So,
Do you want me to mention like the device I'm talking about here?
yeah, that might be good.
Okay, so for context, the device is like this image, and it's essentially, it serves like a female condom. It's inserted like a tampon, and then it has like, I guess the best way to describe it is like these sharp like teeth things that like attach and they like stick to something. And the idea with it is that it attaches and it like causes them pain. So it quote unquote defends the woman, and then they have to be medically removed by a doctor. Therefore, that like calls, like basically gets them the police called, and it proves that this person did rape somebody, and it gets like justice served on them. That, I believe, is the idea behind the product itself. I could be wrong about that. Is that a fair representation? Okay.
I think so. Yeah. Well, I think you were talking about specifically like talking about like these situations that these women are in. So I'm assuming surrounding the rape and stuff like that. So okay, all right. Sorry, didn't mean to derail you guys.
You're good.
If you just quickly pull up the couple of tweets with the other, maybe they're talking about the items that this other woman that was, posting the like mall ninja stuff that you called evil. I want to grab that couple of tweets real quick just so you can see exactly like what the items that we're referring to are. It might be helpful. So just give me 1 second.
Okay.
By the way, I know that Sleepy and Rose will be debating on Thursday as well, guys. So I'm not sure what time we decided on yet, but I know that you guys are going to be debating. So, yeah.
Working on that. Okay. Oh, sorry.
So it looks like it's mostly a tone conversation then, if I'm right. I mean, I get also the reaction maybe, but
I'll tell you, if you would
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you were to talk to me yesterday, it would probably be a very different conversation. I think I have a much more calm down tone today. But sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, therein lies kind of the problem. Like, if I don't feel like we can really like have a very fierce debate about like something that you're very, very non-committal about in terms of how much you actually like, in terms of how much you actually believe it. You know, you're saying these things and then offering to debate them, but then the conversation is a lot more like helping you discover all the caveats to your opinions in real time, to your opinion here in real time. Like, I just feel like that's kind of an issue. If you feel strongly enough about something like this that you're going to make really, really charged statements, you're going to challenge people to debate you on the topic, you should have a lot more conviction in the statement, and you should be a lot more prepared to have like a conversation that tests its logical extremes. So, I mean, I don't want to, and I don't want to seem like I'm like trying to talk down to you or anything like that, but I don't know like what to argue with you now because you basically changed your opinion.
Okay, but Portland, I just want to argue like some context, right? You were the one who saw my tweet and said you wanted to debate me. And in the time since then, I had a really heated conversation with Hunter Avalo, and I had a bunch of tweets attacking me the whole day. And so through all of that, I, thought about it a lot and came to a different conclusion because of those things. So I think that that's fair. I mean, I think it's good, like, if someone, like, to change your opinion when evidence, like, serves. Like, I think I believe a lot of what I said. I just think it's the way I said it was, like, very weird and very bad. So I have
Okay,
to be more
that's kind of
careful
what I
about
mean.
that.
Can you articulate for me, like, what's different about your opinion today and what's the same? I want to understand, like, where
Yeah.
you're at now.
So what's the same is that I do think that a lot of times when people call self-defense, I do not think that it's really warranted or justified. People talk about, like, murdering, like, rapists or killers, and it's like, maybe that is true, and maybe that it is, like, they absolutely had to. But I do, like, it feels weird to see people glorify that on social media and basically celebrate them as heroes and stuff. And it's like, maybe, like, the more mature response is like, okay, this person, like, died. Let's have sympathy for that, like, the humanity and all of that. And also, I feel like a lot of cases, like, where women are, like, being attacked and stuff, I feel like the idea of jumping to murder or jumping to immediately attacking somebody or automatically, like, carrying things to protect yourself, it's kind of like a scary assumption. And I don't like the idea that just, like, I don't like the gun culture in America. I don't like the idea that we should immediately jump to violence in these scenarios. I don't think that's really a healthy thing. And I think if we want to stop these situations, we need to look at the systemic issues that cause them rather than punishment, which is, I think, what the problem with prisons we have now. I think prison reform needs to be a thing. People are just way too quick to say, this person's evil. They're not worth redeeming. This person did this awful thing. Let's punish them. Let's make them suffer as much as possible. And when I saw that image, that basically encapsulates everything that I worried about. It was a sense of, this is not someone wanting to help the situation, not really wanting to, like, lessen the pain. This is someone wanting to add more pain. And it basically summarized what I thought was everything was wrong with what I was seeing. I think I'm better able to articulate now more that because I've thought about it. So it's like my opinions haven't really changed all that much. I just think I'm better at saying how I feel. And I think that, like, I was a little hyperbolic too.
Would you
Okay.
tweet differently? Would you, if that tweet happened today, would you have quote tweeted that differently?
Yeah, I would still, like, I would have quote tweeted it. I wouldn't have said the life in prison thing. That was stupid of me.
What would you have said?
Okay, so this would be really helpful if you could just, like, rephrase yourself in 50 words or less. Like, I don't know how to argue with, like, the revelation that you have, that you realize the language is charged, but you think that we have, like, a culture that doesn't do a good job of having the right kinds of conversations around sexual assault. Like, yeah, that's all good, but, like, this is still about whether or not, in the meantime, until we've created this better culture, whether or not women have and people have the right to violently defend themselves when they're being physically attacked, which is, like, the whole situation in a nutshell. We're not debating, like, whether or not we weren't supposed to be arguing whether or not there are, like, systemic problems with the way we talk about these conversations. You wanted to discuss the evil women that were doing these things that were, like, they belonged in prison. So can you just give me, like, re-summarize your opinion in 50 words?
I think that this device is evil. I'm trying to think of how to do this quickly. It basically encapsulates everything that I think is wrong with these cultures, looking to punish people instead of offering good solutions. I think this device should be banned and not allowed, because it's just going to cause more harm. And I hate the way society just wants. I mean, I can't think of, like, a good way to. I have to think about it. But I would definitely still.
Can we? You said that, like, the concept just now. You said that the concept of women carrying, like, or, like, anyone carrying like, defensive tools, like a knife, presumably, or something like that. Like, that's troubling too. And I have to, like, I need to try to understand, like, what's troubling to you about people who feel, or, like, justifiably or not, that they might be the victims of some kind of violent attack, like, preparing themselves for the possibility and, like, taking some measures to, like, be able to do more than just physically fight.
So society talks a lot about a lot of microaggressions in the case of race, people being afraid of somebody, quoting, like, crime statistics, which I think is really racist. And I feel the same way here. I feel like there's a lot of microaggressions where it's like women are too scared to walk. Like, someone could just be walking in the same direction as you with no harm intention. And a lot of people will assume ill intentions on that person simply because of their sex. And I do think that that's a problem that we have. And I don't think like people people way too often dismiss it because it's like, I see it as an issue, and I feel like it's a problem. And I feel like if like women like carrying pepper spray everywhere, I think I had the conversation with Hunter Avalon, and I like kind of like, I can see why that might be necessary in some cases and why someone would want to. But at the same time, is like, if you're going to be carrying something like that with you, it does, it makes you wonder like, okay, that this person thinks that someone is a scary person based on their sex, and then says like, oh, well, this is because of statistics. And it just reminds me a lot of like the racism that I see. It's like the same kind of arguments, but for some reason, like one is seen as different than the other. And I'm trying to say like, I think these are both bad. Does that make sense to you?
Sort of, but you seem to be kind of like equating some things that I don't think are very close to one, like like the whole idea that you are like more likely to get into a confrontation with someone when you have a gun can be borne out in some statistics and some studies that some people point to as, reason that we should be a little bit stricter about the arming of our general population and like arguing against the like unarmed population as a polite population. I'm sure you've heard that argument before. I don't necessarily like believe in that line of reasoning, but I don't think that extends to self-defense tools that can't really be used on anyone unless that person is already like violently aggressed upon you. And you have to be able to like take some pretty like you need to be able to take a step back and like measure these things for what they are and not like try to equate them to other things that are like tangentially related, because you end up making a lot of false equivalencies that way. I don't think that a person having like a small knife that is like only really usable for defensive purposes makes them any more likely to like use it on someone just because that person is making them nervous. So a woman's not going to like walk past a man that she thinks looks like a little bit aggressive on the street and like stab him proactively. These aren't preemptive tools, they're defensive tools. So
if I can,
I don't understand the issue here.
There's a question in the chat. Somebody wants to ask Rose, if you believe there's no defensive measure against violent rape, and if they just need to submit, or if they need to just submit, or what her position is. This was about something in South Africa where rape at gunpoint is common.
Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty yikesy. I'm not okay. First of all, I want to say I am not aware of the cultural like stuff in South Africa. I should probably be more educated before I comment about stuff like that in the future. So it's probably a lot worse there, and it's my apologies for not being super informed about it. I think I said something yesterday, and basically what I said was, in that scenario, that is essentially what I would do. Now, also, I wanted to clarify, I would never say that anyone else should do that, and I'm not going to like judge somebody if they use like pepper spray or use mace or whatever in that scenario where they feel like they're threatened. Like, I feel like that's totally fine. I said that I personally would just be like, whatever, if someone wants to, like, it's whatever, I don't care. I'll be fine. But like, I feel like a lot of people see that, me saying that, and they think that I'm like, sexist, and I think all women should just lie down and take it. So that's probably where that's coming from. And I probably could have worded it better. I was basically just saying that that's what I would personally do in this scenario, but I would never tell anyone that they should do that. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I don't want to be. I'm not here to like dunk on you or score internet points or anything, dude. I really don't care what the people who are watching this think. I wanted to like figure out what you thought, and I feel like I don't really know what you think as it relates to like your position on women's right to self-defense. Like, so now your position is you would never tell an individual who is being sexually assaulted that they can't use defensive tools like pepper spray or something like, or like, what about a taser? What about a knife? Like, where's the limit? Where do you draw the line and say you can't use this to protect yourself?
And I'm going to say, I'm
why?
going to be completely honest. I think in the past I did actually say that like you shouldn't use those things, but like I don't believe that anymore. And also, I do draw the line at like knives and stuff. Like knives are not okay, and guns aren't okay. But like other stuff, I'd have to like know more about the specific methods. But like I prefer like a non-lethal method that's going to do the job without really harming the person in a significant way. I think that's the way to
that's
go
a
forward.
Very optimistic way to want to handle sexual assaults. Like
and also,
I don't think that that's really practical in reality.
Somebody made a good point in chat saying that, you know, that if you're going to make a comment about like sexual assault in like South Africa, where it's like endemic, right? It's an endemic issue. And oftentimes in other countries, like even within the US, sexual assault can, done by somebody often is accompanied by like other types of assault, right? Physical assault, other things like that. You know, often be a very dangerous situation. I assume that in a place like South Africa or, for example, India, like if sexual assault is going to be even more likely to be accompanied by, you know, some type of like, you know, lethal
additional physical violence.
Yeah, additional physical violence and even lethality in that, right? So I guess the person in the chat makes a good point that like that, you know, since it was referring to South Africa, that maybe, you know, maybe I guess it would be better to read up on the actual issue there.
So I said that a few minutes ago. Yeah.
I mean, generally speaking, like that's my whole goal in this conversation is to figure out, like, do you really believe these like incredibly charged things, or are you saying these things from a position of like, I heard a thing, this was like the first 250 character limit response that popped into my head, I'm going to say it and I'm going to worry about the consequences later. And
the latter, for sure.
And I think that that's the issue that a lot of people take. And I think that like a lot of the criticisms come from really extreme, you know, came in really extreme ways, but that like the honest criticisms of like, hey, you really shouldn't be saying these kinds of things if your opinion is so tenuous that you can be pushed off of it by like a conversation with Hunter Avallone that pokes some basic holes in the logic. And like, yeah, I'm sure that the overwhelming wave negative attention on Twitter didn't like necessarily like discourage you from thinking about this further, but it also seems like you're kind of enjoying that attention insofar as like you've retweeted that person, like screenshotted that person's retweet how many times and given like updates on how many likes it has and stuff. Like obviously you're understanding that there's like some level of notoriety that you've achieved here, even if it's not in the way that you want to. And like my concern here is that like you're kind of walking back these positions because you want to be like more palatable to this larger audience that's tuning into you. Like, can you kind of help me understand like where you're actually at in terms of your belief that what you said, no knives. So like, where's the limit? And what is like the penalty for a woman who carries a knife and deploys it against someone who tries to sexually assault her violently? Like what's the penalty in Rose's world? Why?
Yeah. So first of all, the reason why I responded so much is because my notifications have been filled with so many comments. And because like when someone makes a tweet screenshotting you, sending a lot of hate your way that has 400,000 likes, that's gonna affect you in a way. You know, that's a lot of people who don't like you. I'm sure millions of people saw that tweet. It wasn't like, I think it's fair for me to like, you know, for that to like affect me in a way. Like I said, I spent all day yesterday, like really thinking about it. I think that that's also like fair. So I guess what you're saying is, sorry, can you repeat the last part? In Rose world, I just want to clarify what you're saying so I could properly respond to it.
I want to understand, like, you about a lot of stuff yesterday. So like, where are you at now? What's the limit to what a person can do to defend themselves? And like, what's the punishment if it's not life in prison? If someone, say, is like violently attacked and they use a knife to kill their attacker?
Yeah. So I think I have a better thing. So I think in a situation, I think we go to a jury and say, we have people like look at it in court and say, if the jury decides like this was not a situation where murder was necessary, you could apply what is it, like an accidental murder charge, which isn't extreme, or maybe we create a new charge for this. I don't know. I think accidental murder is fine, like in the sense that a court deems that this murder. But at the same time, though, I do understand the argument that like doing that like will not it will incentivize women to like not take action, and that could be harmful too.
That's
It's
the chilling
tough.
effect, right? So
Yeah.
already people who are subjected to this often feel guilty fighting back, right? Imagine feeling guilty about fighting back on somebody who's assaulting you, right? And so you know, in one instance, you know, yes, it may be cringy for somebody to be bragging about their knife that they have on Twitter, or you know, their self-defense methods, but at the same time, we're talking about a whole group of people who have been socialized to be people pleasers, to not fight back, to avoid saying the word no by any means necessary, right? And so, so maybe there is a little bit of glorification that's needed to fight back on that stigma, and maybe, you know, like it's like kind of like the price you have to pay, right? Because too often, if somebody is getting assaulted, if they're getting sexually assaulted, there is a high likelihood of other types of assault being done to them. I mean, almost always there's physical assault involved, right? And if it's like a stranger, you don't know this person, they're not somebody that you're well acquainted with. If it's a stranger assaulting you, then you know the likelihood of you ending up dead may be higher as well, right? And this is even in the West. So, yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to ramble.
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah.
I'd have to think about it. I like I know like a lot of people don't like this comparison. I just think about like what happens with the police and like the self-defense. Like the police are protected so well with their self-defense laws that they can basically shoot whoever they want to shoot and just get away with murder. And I just feel like that leads to a lot of unnecessary deaths. I don't think it's the same. I think there's a lot of different like reasons why that kind of law should not be implemented here.
I mean, like qualified immunity for police is a very different conversation from like self-defense for people who are like, we're not talking about someone who is like walking down the street, sees someone and thinks like, oh man, this person is like in a group that's like statistically likely to assault me. So they like preemptively attack them. We're obviously talking about people who are being attacked, who need some way to either like end or escape that attack, and like what level of violence they're able to, like defensive violence they're able to enact, or like justifiable to enact to escape those kinds of situations. So, I mean, I don't think these situations have like these questions have easy answers, but I do think that there needs to be like a lot more charitability given to people who we know are at like on the very, very like vast majority of cases in like a physical power differential against the people that they fear being attacked by. People like women aren't getting self-defense tools like knives and tasers and stuff because they think like, well, the man's not going to give me a fair fight, but if he did, I'd kick his ass. Like they are coming at this from a place of knowing that they're at a physical disadvantage in almost every violent confrontation they could have with a man, and they're almost certainly not going to be the one that like starts that violent confrontation if they have it, except with the exception of like domestic situations. That's like a whole different thing, but we're not talking about those. Presumably we're talking about like being assaulted by, like in this context, a stranger or someone that you're like unfamiliar with. And I think that you do all women a great disservice when you try to like lump them in with trigger happy cops when they seek means to like level the playing field in the event that they're attacked. They're not going out necessarily like looking for a fight by and large. Although, yeah, obviously, like I said, I do think that there was like a little bit of glorification going on with the original tweet that you were responding to. I think that there's like some people that are a little bit too eager to be like, yeah, let's castrate and kill all rapists and stuff. And obviously, I don't believe in that kind of like extreme rhetoric on that side either. But I want you to be aware, as someone who seems like really determined to be part of this space and part of these conversations, that you're not pushing back against that kind of rhetoric when you call it evil and you call those people pieces of shit. You're feeding into it and like you're perpetuating the cycle and making a case that like from like optically speaking, it sounds like you're saying that women who feel this way, who feel like they're at risk of violence, like they have no reason to justifiably and genuinely feel that way, and they have no grounds to defend themselves. So I feel like we're, kind of coming to a point where like I don't think that we really disagree, but like the main point that I have is I really hope you try to like consider your phrasing and like the nuance of what you're saying a little bit more clearly in the future if you're so like determined to be part of this space, because it should be a healthy space. I mean, it's a shit show right now and it's not like helping to feed into it.
Yeah, I would say a lot of my like aggressiveness in the tweets that I make is because I've seen a lot of culture and a lot of feminist spaces. There was a video I watched that had 200,000 views and a very positive reception, where this guy is basically talking about how all men should be castrated and locked in like a jail cell or until they're like 18, and only like a few males should be like breeding. And I'm like thinking to myself, this is like the most horrific stuff. And this person was trying to argue like that this is moral because men are like more statistically likely to be killers. And I just thought to myself, like, this is like honestly evil stuff. And yet the comments are like okay with it weirdly. So I when I think of like the stuff that I say, I'm thinking of like the more extreme stuff like that, which I feel like is more common than it needs to be. I know that's not what we're talking about here. So I probably, and I've had people say this, I probably ascribe more extreme views to people than they actually believe. And that's probably something I definitely need to work on. I think that's fair.
Awesome.
Oh.
Sounds like a productive conversation. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So didn't mean to interrupt.
You're good. I honestly like, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I do feel like it's productive, if only because like it gives a lot of people an opportunity to kind of like hear the process behind, like the thought process behind you making these statements. I feel like we're also not doing anyone any good when we like characterize you as like this evil, malicious monster who's pro-rape and wants women to suffer and stuff like that. Obviously, I think that that's probably counterproductive too. If you can't like, what my whole goal here is to like understand why you're saying the things that you're saying. I want to understand if you're like, if you're honestly coming from a place of like, where these things can be taken at face value and extrapolated out to your entire value system. I think it's pretty disgusting. But I think that like by and large, those are like, you just said, you're over ascribing, like making generalizations about like large groups of people based on like what you see one person get some Twitter traction on. And I think that that's kind of like a dangerous way to feed into that cycle instead of help improve it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out if your like goal is. That makes sense?
Oh, you're muted, Rose.
Apologies. I understand. I think the general idea is like, just be more careful and like give it more thought. I get that. I feel, like I said, I feel like there's like this weird thing in culture that I'm seeing, and I feel like there's not enough pushback against it. So that's kind of what like, makes me tweet what I do. But I have a bunch of people tell me that like this is really toxic. I need to just not. But like, yeah, I do want to be a part of this space. But like I said, I really only started doing this like a month and a half ago. Like, I'm still pretty new to this, and I feel like as I'm like getting more into it, like I'm learning a lot. So I think that just comes with time.
I do have a question for both of you guys. Where is your line for self-defense?
So I think that for me, I'm not like an advocate for things like, I think like stand your ground laws are probably a little bit too extreme in the way that they've been used in this country. But I do think that generally speaking, if you are committing an act of violence on someone or putting someone in a situation where they have reason to believe that an act of violence might be committed on them, like you're breaking into someone's house and they have a good reason to believe that their children are under threat. I think that there's like probably more situations that I'm comfortable describing as like self-defense than situations I would, and not. But like the vast majority of the line is like physical violence or the threat of physical violence. If you're inviting that upon someone, then you have like, you kind of have to accept the consequences of it, especially in a country with more guns than people.
Okay, I guess my line of self-defense is I think I have like a more strict like sense of like if your life or if you're in immediate danger, like first of all, if someone is like punching you, that doesn't give you the right to like shoot them with a gun and then kill them, right? I think the crime, like I don't think a lot of things are a death sentence, and that's where I'm coming at this from. Like a lot of things that people call self-defense, I wouldn't call that a death sentence, and I don't think it should be. So I think it's important to like have a distinction of like, yes, this should be the last resort only if your life is like really in immediate danger, or you feel like you are in like imminent danger, should you resort to this. Preferably if you're going to act in self-defense, it'd be much preferable to do so in a way where the person isn't really harmed all that much and you can safely get away from the situation. That's, in my opinion, that's the best course of action.
Okay.
Is that a good or do you want me to?
I guess maybe I would ask, like in a domestic violence situation, for example, those can often escalate to death, right? But often start.
Yeah, like how do you calculate your risk of death in a violent confrontation with someone, especially one that they're initiating, that like you can't physically escape from without them letting you, or like without incapacitating them? Like how do you do that calculation in the heat of the moment when your like fight or flight reflex is kicking in? Because in most states you do have the obligation to try to like remove yourself from a violent altercation before you resort to some kind of like, you know, lethal self-defense, but there are limits to that. That's kind of different in every state. The vast majority of states though have some kind of like, you know, qualifier for you needing to like have a legitimate or like perceive a legitimate threat to your life. So like how do you go about making that calculation in the heat of the moment?
I'm going to say this real quick because I have to use the restroom, so I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera off in a second, but I do want to answer this real quick. I want to say that I've thought about this, and a lot of times I can understand that in the heat of the moment, sometimes it is hard to tell. Sometimes you don't know, you know, and that can be the scary thing is like in those situations. So I can 100% sympathize with the argument that it's like, okay, well, we don't know if this is going to be a scary situation, so it's best to not punish people in the chance that like, you know, so that people know that they can do this and feel safe about it, that they feel like they can protect themselves. I completely understand that. So I get that there's nuance. So I'm given this thought. I understand that there's nuance here. Like you're not always going to know 100%. But I do still feel like societally, like there are people who, or maybe I don't, maybe I'm totally like ignorant about this. I don't know. I just feel like it's important to emphasize that like, unless you are pretty sure that like something is going to happen and you feel like that's your only shot, like the only thing you can do, I still think it's important to like, that's your moral standing point.
Wait, you're pretty sure something's going to happen, or you're pretty sure?
Like if you feel genuinely threatened and it's like not really open for interpretation. Like,
okay, but like genuinely threatened for your life, or genuinely threatened to be like sexually assaulted? Because you made the claim on Twitter that 99.9999% of rapes don't end in death.
Yeah, and that might be like first world countries. I understand like other cultures, but also at the same time, like I'm willing to say like in cases of like sexual assault and stuff, I would much prefer like using like pepper spray or mace or something over like a gun or something.
I'm sorry, like, guys, dropped off for a second there. You hear me okay?
I hear ya.
All right. Apologies. Go ahead.
I don't know about the chat though. I'm sure they can comment. I would say though, like I think I came, like I said, I talked to like Hunter Avalon for like an hour about this. I think I came to the conclusion that like someone should be able to defend themselves from rape and stuff. Like, yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
So you don't have any issue with women who are being like sexually assaulted defending themselves with like a knife, or like where's the line? You said knives.
Well, the line is a knife. A line is a knife and a gun. That's too far for me.
Well, like, I mean, now there's a pretty big line, like pretty big difference between a knife and a gun too. I mean, like are you saying that women shouldn't be able to like use a knife because it might kill the person that's attacking them? Or like, I don't understand where's.
honestly, like might be controversial. I honestly think that like knives are like worse than guns and stuff because
Yeah, no,
like
that's not.
guns are like more effective and stuff. Like the knife is like more like slow and painful. Like
You've
that,
just
like,
watched
the
too many
knife is more
movies. Knives aren't
torturous.
worse than guns.
No, no, guns are more likely to kill. I just think that like knives are just like I don't know, like oh, they're icky, they're scary, like. But I don't like either of them. I
Yeah,
just like
because like when you
I'm all
watch the
banning knives
movies,
anyway.
like the guy that gets stabbed, he's got that horrible scene where he bleeds out really slowly and stuff, and then you watch the movie where the guy gets shot with a gun and like, oh, a shot to the chest and he dies instantly. Like, yeah, the reality is that they're both very visceral, very,
Oh,
very
definitely,
like,
yeah.
you know, like violent ways to be attacked by someone, but like you have to understand that like not all of those means of like non-lethal deterrent are even going to work, and like people have to have some ability to protect themselves. Like so knives are out, pepper spray's good. What about tasers? Like I'm having trouble figuring out where the
Um,
line is. It's like an arbitrarily drawn line on around an object.
I don't I don't know. I think tasers can like cause harm. Like I mean, I don't like tasers. I don't think they're great. I think tasers are better than guns, but like I don't know the statistics behind this, but like can't like tasers cause like medical issues and stuff? Like I don't I don't know.
Being sexually assaulted can cause a lot more medical.
There are long-term,
Yeah.
there are long-term health effects of sexual assault.
Yeah, no, I believe that.
Long-term effects of being tased, very minimal in comparison. You're placing people in it just seems like you're really reducing down, like undermining the impact of sexual assault, like that it can have physically and emotionally, both short-term and long-term, the underlying like conditions that might give like a woman or an individual reason to believe that they might need to like defend themselves violently are not the same as like the considerations that a police officer makes when they choose to join the force or something like that. Like these are ingrained societal structures that we can't just like turn around and change. So we need to be able to like approach the society that we live in with like the tools that are the most likely to keep us alive and keep people who would like suspend our bodily autonomy against our will from being able to do that. You have to understand the importance of that, not just like, treating being sexually assaulted like it's, having your purse stolen on the subway or something like that. They're not the same
Well,
thing.
it's more extreme, though, yeah. I just like, just so you know, like I'm consistent when it comes to this. Like I got into a lot of heat for some people. I was talking to Dylan Burns because I was like talking stuff about Ukraine and like I don't like that, people are trapped in the country. I don't like the draft. I think people should just be able to leave freely. And like I just don't like the idea that like people are refusing to compromise. And I think doing so would like make less people die in the war. So like I'm just very against violence in general. Like I'm a pacifist, right? And that influences a lot of my beliefs. So if you're wondering, like, that's kind of what I feel here.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I just sent you a link, Rose, to Rain, and it talks about the effects of sexual violence. And I think it's important to read up on this kind of stuff because there are long-term like health effects that affect people for years from
That makes
afterwards.
sense.
Yeah. So like there are things people typically see like PTSD, flashbacks, things like that. But like other things that can happen are sleep disorders. Sleep disorders are incredibly common with people who've been assaulted, and eating disorders are also incredibly common among people who've been sexually assaulted. So they're like it's a very wide.
Let's not
range of
forget
things.
that
Yeah. I'm sorry.
now where Roe v. Wade is dead. Like, let's not forget that we now officially live in a post Roe v. Wade era where states are already enacting laws against like restricting abortion access with no exemption for cases of rape or incest. So like the reality is that like even in 2022 where like we've made a tremendous amount of cultural progress on a lot of social issues, we have slipped backwards in terms of our accessibility for individuals who've been victims of sexual assault to like acquire the services that they need to live a normal life afterwards. So, I mean, there are just a multitude of long-term consequences. There are a ton of different compounding factors wherein a woman might, or like a person who's being assaulted, might very genuinely feel that they're going to be murdered at the end of that interaction and have no way of knowing. Like, you can't,
you
can't ask someone during a sexual assault, like, hey,
are you going to kill me?
You're going to leave me. Exactly.
That's fair. Okay.
You're cool after this, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I am so sorry. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Just
You're fine.
confirm that my camera's off. Yeah.
Yep.
You're good.
Okay.
Star, I'm gonna grab a quick drink real quick.
Yeah,
Okay.
Take your time. I'll just talk to chat in the meantime. So.
Cool. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem.
What's up, chat? Hope you guys are enjoying.
So yeah, chat, I think a thing that a lot of people don't know about, like if you go to this, I'll link it for you guys. But so depression, flashbacks, PTSD, self-harm often is a long-term effect of sexual assault. STIs can definitely happen. Substance abuse, often people who've been sexually assaulted start abusing substances. Dissociation is something that a lot of people have. Panic attacks, but things that are incredibly common that people don't seem to people seem to underestimate is the amount of eating disorders and the amount of sleep disorders that a lot of people get after sexual assault. Yeah, so Sleepy and Rose will be debating on Thursday. I don't know what the subject is yet, but I know I'll be moderating that. So yeah, it's super important, you know, eating disorders, pregnancy, sleep disorders, suicide. These are all things that can happen as a result of a sexual assault. I think probably like sleep disorders and eating disorders are something that happens a lot. People don't even think that is associated with that kind of stuff. So. Check the Discord for the subject.
Hey, I'm back. I'm back.
No problem. So I know you and Sleepy are going to be debating. The topics that they were thinking of debating were either the LGBTQ community, chasers and dating, and feminism, yes or no. So.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that later. By the way, just so you know, I was kind of listening to you. Like, I had my AirPods in. So when you're talking about this kind of like what were you saying? Oh yeah, all the stuff that can happen after rape. Like, I 100% believe that, right? Like, I know that those effects, like, that doesn't surprise me. Mm-hmm. A lot of those mental health effects can stem from that.
Yeah, and there's physical pain even. Like, people will get physical pain, recurring physical and chronic pain after a sexual assault. So.
Yeah. Let me just make sure on my camera. Okay, my camera's good. Sorry.
Okay. So, a question, like, you know what a utilitarian calculus is?
What's that?
Okay, so like super basically explained, it's like it's like a theoretical equation you could do to calculate the amount of good and the amount of bad in any given action, and like make a determination, like an A or B determination based on that calculation. So like in this scenario, the utilitarian calculation that you'd be trying to make is like, how much good and how much bad am I going to do by like violently defending myself against someone who's sexually assaulting me? And this is like, even without being like under physical duress, it's like an incredibly complicated thing to try to like figure out in any given situation. Obviously, life is really complicated and most things have like pretty, multifaceted good and bad aspects to them. But there's I feel like there's very, very little practicality in asking someone who's being like violently attacked, whether it be like sexually or even just like you said, someone's punching you in the face. I don't think you should be able to shoot them or stab them. Like you're putting you're putting a lot of onus on the person who's being attacked to do this like tremendous amount of emotional and situational math at any given time to try to determine like how much violence is justified in response to the violence that's being enacted on me. And the simplest solution to the whole thing is like just don't do violence to people, don't attack people, don't rape people, and you won't have to open up this like Pandora's box of consequences. I think that you have some kind of like responsibility to the people around you to consider that like there's not a lot someone who's being violently attacked is going to be able to like take into account and rationalize in the moment. And there's not a lot of information they get about like what the future after that attack is going to look like. So, I mean, does that make sense?
I guess so. Can you repeat what you're saying? Just like the main points of it?
Said a lot of stuff. It was basically just saying you are taking this position where you're asking people to do a ton of very, very complicated math to try to figure out like the risk and reward to defending themselves violently against someone who's attacking them violently in a situation where you're obviously not going to be able to like separate yourself from it and think rationally. You're going to have to make like an immediate instinctual decision, and you should be able to carry around at least like some limited tools to improve your likelihood of surviving those kinds of situations. So, I mean, I don't think that I guess I'm just not really sure where we go from here. I don't want to like beat a dead horse or anything, but it sounds like you've basically changed your opinion from like self-defense is basically fine under the vast majority of sexual assault cases and violent attacks, but you don't think knives are okay? Is that pretty much like where we're at this point?
Basically, I would say non-lethal is always preferable to lethal. If it's possible, it'd be much better. I think those are solutions we should be focusing on. That's really how I feel here, because I'm against I've already said this,
But you talked about like systemic issues. I want like the individual prescription, like the prescription on an individual level. What do we do? What do people who feel vulnerable to sexual assault and violent attacks do right now to protect themselves if they're not if it's morally wrong to carry around a knife?
Yeah. So this probably isn't going to make me a ton of friends. First of all, I think the cultural difference between South Africa and the United States is probably I'm assuming we have a much better situation than they do. So that just proves that a better society leads to less of these instances. I would say just make educated decisions. I'm not saying that women shouldn't be allowed to do stuff, and I'm not saying that it's their fault. That's stupid. I don't believe that. Victim blaming is dumb and bad. But I think it's important to just try to be safe, but don't live your life in fear at the end of the day. I feel like a lot of people are living their life in fear. And it makes me sad because I hate to see that, I mean, the world isn't really that dangerous and that scary. We live in one of the safest times ever. So I just don't like this idea that I see all the time. If we're talking about how to prevent these things, I don't have the answers. It's a very hard question to ask.
Yeah, I don't need you to solve society's ails. I'm more asking.
Yeah.
I do want to ask if somebody gets raped, and they become pregnant from it, do you think that they should carry the pregnancy to term?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. The answer to that is I don't know, because it's I understand how that can seem really cool, and it's the woman didn't intend to. So I'd probably say abortion's probably okay in that instance. I'm very pro-life. See, here's my moral, where I suffer from this. It's part of me is okay, well, the child shouldn't have to suffer because of that. Like part of me is like, okay, you know, this child like being born, it still has the right to live, but then it's also like this is so tricky because I see both sides here, and it's like it's complicated because like I think it's like wrong to like want to force someone to carry a pregnancy when they didn't choose that, they didn't want that, but it's also wrong to like want to like, I'm not going to judge anybody in that scenario for making that choice. I just it's a tricky one for me.
But like someone who didn't want to get pregnant should like necessarily you're kind of hemming and hawing about whether anyone who wants an elective abortion should be able to receive one at that point, not just cases of like sexual assault. I mean, sexual assault, most conservatives, or at least like most of the sane ones, have no problem biting the bullet on like the rape and incest and exemption.
Yeah.
That's a pretty easy thing for most of them to cop
And I'm
to.
okay with that too. I'm okay with that.
Cool. But the logic that you're kind of like using for it, that should necessarily carry over to just like any woman who, or like any person who gets pregnant and, you know, didn't mean to, whether it was like through like prophylactic failure or something, you know, something like that, that was unexpected, but like now it's here and you have a pregnancy that's like going to be forced to be carried to term because that individual wasn't like able to get abortion access. So, like, this logic should extend to everybody, but you say pretty repeatedly that you're pro-life, so I'm kind of confused.
How is that confusing that I'm pro-life?
Because it's a pro-choice art, like it's a pro-choice sentiment when you're saying like, oh, well, you know, a person who doesn't want to be pregnant shouldn't be like forced to carry it to term. You didn't, you know.
No, I said in the case of someone who didn't choose to like, this is not someone who actively wanted to like be like, I'm very sympathetic to that argument, but at the same time, it's like, I understand both sides. And that's why I'm like, I'm not really like super attached in the case of like rape. Like, I understand, like I'm pro-life in like a lot of aspects when it comes to like this situation, but I can sympathize with someone who didn't, you know, want to have a kid being forced to, and I think it's kind of cruel to expect somebody to like force them to have a kid with their rapist like child. So like I can understand that. Like I can be pro-life in like most cases, but like, you know, but like I said, also I feel like I'm more nuanced about this than I used to be too. Hello?
Feel like we're using nuance as a scapegoat for being like really wishy-washy about these things. I'm not trying to, and again, like I'm not trying to like really, you know, dunk on you or something stupid like that. I'm trying to understand and like get some like consistency in these, you know, like in this rhetoric, because the like vast majority of women who seek, or like people who seek abortions, they're doing so because of an unwanted pregnancy, not because like, not just in situations with like rape and incest. And your logic for those people, you know, victims of rape and incest, is basically just that like they didn't choose to get pregnant. They didn't necessarily choose. So I'm trying to understand like where the choice begins, like where the line for like the validity of choice as like a metric here begins and ends. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have to really think about it, actually. I mean, you do bring up a good point.
Yeah, I don't expect you to have all like, you know, all your moral positions totally fleshed out. You're what, like 22, right?
Yeah, I'm 22.
Yeah, so like obviously it's totally fine to still be like super new to this, to still be like feeling out your like rhetorical style and trying to like discover some of your opinions in real time. My only caution would be like, don't make extremely charged, extremely like statements that can be really easily perceived as extremely like judgmental and hurtful, and then offer to like debate those positions until you've really like sat down and asked yourself if you believe those positions. You know what I mean? Because like you're giving me a bunch of like perfectly nuanced, perfectly like reasonable, kind of wishy-washy, but like mostly answers that are like vague because it feels like you haven't spent a ton of time like internally investigating your thoughts on this. You just kind of said what your knee-jerk reaction was on Twitter, and it caught like an unexpectedly big wave of attention. Like,
well, okay.
I get it.
Can you understand that like tweeting on Twitter is much different than having like a full-on debate on something? When you have a debate, you're gonna
but
like
when
have
you
better
say
takes.
like right,
You know?
but when you say like this is my take, this is like the big absolute super morally heavy statement I'm making, and I will defend this on debates. People don't come into debates expecting to like have those positions like not, I don't want to use the word walked back, but it is like when you say I take this back and I apologize for saying it and stuff, but I still want to debate it. It's
called realizing you're wrong. Like, I mean, like learning new information. Like, yeah, I'm willing to change my mind on stuff. That's something people have criticized me for in the past. People have said like, oh, well, you think it like you're, and that's funny because like so many people have said to me in the past that I need to like start doing that more. And like I'm doing that, and now people are like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing that." I don't know. Just I don't know. A lot of times I feel like
I can only respond to the criticisms I can only respond to the criticisms I've made. You know, and that's where I'm coming at it from. Is like I heard a really extreme position, so I wanted to argue with someone who said that they really believed in and wanted to argue in favor of that extreme position, but. It's a lot more moderate and it's a lot more layered than you lead on, and it's understandable that it would be. Yeah, no, dude. Again, I'm trying to like give you some charity here. I'm not trying to.
Okay, you're good. Yeah, I apologize that this wasn't what you expected it to be.
No, again, it's fine.
Oh. She disconnected. I wonder if she's coming back.
I'm guessing she'll come back.
Yeah, maybe her computer died or something. Or her phone died. I don't know. Because it looked like she was in the middle of a sentence. Oh, she said her phone died.
Right.
Thank you for the subscribe, Sidewalk Chalk. Sorry.
You're good. You're good. Did she say if she'll be able to hop back on?
She said that she'll be back. What is the debate about here? When, if ever, is violent or lethal self-defense justified, Taftosh? Also, hello, Taftosh. Welcome. Are you streaming right now?
Hi, Taftosh.
You want to jump in, Taftosh? Yeah, join the lobby in the Discord.
Phone died. I'm back. My phone was dead. Apologies. What did I miss?
Nothing.
My phone was at. Okay, I didn't miss anything. Oh, why is Taft AJ here?
Hi. Oh, well, she said
I might not be here for long. I don't know.
She said drag me in, so I was like, yeah, come in. So, yeah.
Do you want to say anything to me? Because I've had some drama with you on Twitter before. I don't know if that's what this is about, but
no, I don't. What is the current positions on violence? Oh shit! Yeah.
So we were talking about specifically in reference to that tweet with the anti-rape device.
Oh, interesting.
And how far is violence justified? How far are you willing to justify it? At what point is it no longer acceptable?
Because I'm pretty like
pacifist. Is no knives. I think with the we cut it off at knives, no pun intended. So
interesting.
We were just talking about how if somebody's assaulting you, like, you know, physically or sexually assaulting you, there's no way of telling how much that situation is going to escalate, right? You don't know if that's going to, you know, eventually lead to your death, right? So are you justified in defending yourself? And if so, to what extent, I guess?
I think there's like a moral and a strategic question, right? Because like the strategic question is like, if defending yourself leads to like worse harm overall, like it leads to you getting murdered, then obviously it's not good to defend yourself in that scenario. But like maybe a more interesting question is like, if you know that you can successfully defend yourself, is that then justified? And like I would say that like you're justified in self-defense if you know that like you can self-defend effectively without escalating to the point of causing like more harm or significantly more harm, right? Like if someone's burgling your home, you know, you can't like kill them and their family because that would be like ridiculous. You can't like brutalize their corpse or something. But like you would be justified in like physically stopping them.
So we did touch on like, you know, the right to defend your home and your family a little bit, but we're more interested in like what your justification, like what level of defensive violence can you employ to stop a sexual assault? Basically, the vast majority of like the framing of the conversation is around an aggressor who is attacking and sexually assaulting you, and basically like what level of objective like information can you have about the long-term outcome, and what that factor, if any, does that play in your right to like use violence to up to and including like lethal means to defend yourself? So should you have to just sit there and take it if you don't know 100% for sure that you're going to be murdered at the end of that interaction? Or if you have like even good reason to believe that you won't be murdered at the end of that interaction, does that mean that you no longer have like the moral justification for defending yourself violently if someone's trying to suspend your physical autonomy in the case of a rape?
I think the other factor here is that we want to allow people a certain degree of self-defense because that can like deter people from engaging in violence. So like, you know, you want to have people have like a degree of leniency with the, you know, how much self-defense they engage in, because you don't want people to feel like they're totally entitled to engaging in enacting violence against people with no repercussions.
Thank you so much for the raid.
So like, you know, we talk about like property rights and whatnot. And there's, you know, the famous blade of grass example where like someone comes up and they steal a blade of grass from you. And, you know, that's not very harmful, but like eventually they'll steal infinitely from you. So I think that people agree that there's like some degree to which you're allowed to engage in self-defense to prevent future transgressions on your personal property and well-being.
I would say, like, in an instance, like, if someone is going to mug me in public, I'm just going to let them take my money. Not everyone's going to respond in that way. In my instance, I just want to be out of that situation and be safe. Obviously, when it comes to, like, rape, that's very more extreme and different. So I understand people having, like, a much more violent response to that. I just, like I said, I mean, I don't know how much of this you caught. I guess my general opinion was that I think it should be, like, a last resort. And that, like, you know, generally speaking, if there's a way to not be violent or use non-violent means like a pepper spray or a mace or something, then that's the way to go, generally speaking.
Okay, so again, this is like comes back to like the utilitarian calculation of like how can you in the moment like make some kind of determination about like how much net good and how much net bad will be achieved by like stabbing this person who's sexually assaulting you with the knife you have in your pocket. There's no real like, Well,
I think the thing here is that like we want to, as a rule, allow people to engage in self-defense because it discourages the act of aggression in the first place in the future. And so if you allow people to engage in self-defense, then you discourage the first aggression. Yeah.
Sorry, Taj, go ahead.
Yeah, so you discourage the initial aggression, which is quite good, because if you discourage the initial aggression, then you have less need to engage in future self-defense. So the total degree of violence decreases overall.
Do you want me to? Sorry.
Okay, you're still here.
I'm sorry.
Okay, you guys go ahead for a second. I'm gonna switch my Wi-Fi source real quick, so it's getting a little patchy. I'm just gonna fix it real quick.
No problem.
Yeah, you're good. Taft, is there anything you want to address to me specifically? Like anything you want me to respond to?
I don't know. I haven't followed the conversation that deeply, so I'm just putting out opinions here.
I did hear something. I heard that. I'm so sorry if this is going to sound really offensive. I know that Rose said something about Taftage on Twitter about transness.
What did she say? The dysphoria mind reading thing, where she doesn't believe I have dysphoria.
I don't want to get like NSFW, but like it was about. Remember, I had like that picture that you like quote tweeted because I was like, I don't think like people showing their bodies pre-op stuff. That was me.
Okay, yeah, and you were the person who was like, if you post pictures of your body on the internet, or if you post pictures of yourself, if you post a picture of body parts that you're dysphoric about on the internet, that means you don't have dysphoria. I mean,
it makes me ask a lot of questions, and I think that it's harmful to trans people. Yeah.
I think it's, I don't know. I don't know if we really need to argue it, because I think it's just kind of a stupid position to have. I don't know if there's like, you can really go that deep on it. Like, obviously people can like not like a body part, but still post pictures of it on the internet. Like people who have like physical deformities, but are still confident posting themselves on the internet. They might not be happy with that physical deformity, but also okay with people seeing it.
I guess to me, it's like, first of all, if someone's own comfortability level is different from another person, I don't think that inherently makes someone like invalid as a trans person. But it's like when you put that on the internet, first of all, I think that it helped create and encourage this culture of chasers that we currently see. And it's like, I want, like, as a trans woman myself, I want people to just see me as a normal cisgender, basically, woman, right? I don't want people to see me. And like, that's the problem is I worry that people are just going to see trans women in that way. It's going to cause these misconceptions, I fear, within trans people. And I just think that it's extremely
See trans women as what?
What do you mean?
You said see trans women as that way, but what way?
It's just when someone is like comfortably showing parts that we're supposed to be dysphoric over, it sends the wrong message to people, right? Like, and also
that
like,
message.
It sends the message that like trans people aren't really dysphoric, and sends the message that like trans people are like more.
No, because I think there's a difference between being dysphoric about something and being ashamed of that body part. So I think that, like, again, with the example of someone who is disfigured, that disfiguring can cause them like real psychological trauma, and they may be uncomfortable with like a disfigured part of their body, but that doesn't mean that they are necessarily ashamed to demonstrate it on the internet. Or by like showing like their disfigurement on the internet, they're advocating to people that like being disfigured is okay. Like if someone, experiences an acid attack and they post themselves on the internet, they post like selfies. I don't think that's telling people that like acid attacks are okay, or that they're like totally happy with being disfigured. I think what it's demonstrating is that they're not like ashamed of their body, and that they're okay with people seeing it.
But I am ashamed of my body. That's the reason.
Okay, so then don't post it, right? So like that's your personal move. And like if you are ashamed of your body, I think that that's like, you're not obligated to post your body on the internet. And I think that like if people are extrapolating, like if someone says that like one person is not ashamed of their body, therefore like no one is ashamed of that part of their body, I think that's a ridiculous, extrapolation. You can't really take responsibility for all the ridiculous extrapolations that some tiny portion of the population will have.
This kind of comes back to the issue of like using charged language to make your point when you really don't feel like very strongly about, or like have a very like well fleshed out thought about that opinion. Like calling something, like saying you don't like something is substantively different from calling it like harmful. The implications there are pretty significantly different. And what you said was that like the images that Taf was promoting are harmful, which like, it sounds like what you really mean by harmful is like, they trigger like an insecurity in you personally that you find really like difficult to deal with, and like something that you feel like you know, is not like the way you want to be defined as a trans woman, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's like any greater harm being caused to like trans women in general.
I think
I
think she would just say that, like, when I post, you know, pictures of my genitals on the internet, people see that and think that trans women in general are comfortable with their genitals, and therefore it's comfortable, like they're justified in like talking to trans people about their genitals, or like going up to trans people and like fetishizing their genitals, that sort of thing, right?
Yes.
And so I think that like the way I'd respond to that is by saying that like the idea that because one person posts their genitals on the internet, that like it's okay to go up to anyone and like assume that they feel a certain way about their genitals is an unreasonable extrapolation. And I don't think that most people are operating on this kind of interpretation where because one person is comfortable with something, all people are comfortable with something. And so I don't think it's like my responsibility to like make sure that I'm catering to like every person who might have like a crazy interpretation of the things that I post. Like if I post myself on the internet, you know, some people might believe that they're like receiving messages from God or something, that like I'm telling them that they need to go out and like commit a crime. I don't think I'm necessarily responsible to like actively curtailing that interpretation, because that kind of interpretation I think would be so rare, and like the general culture is already telling them that that's not an adequate, you know, interpretation of what I'm doing. And so I think also like when I post my genitals, I think if someone looks at me posting my genitals and then makes the extrapolation that like, well, all people are okay with me like talking about their genitals to them, I think is probably a pretty extreme extrapolation. And if anything, I think it would be more on the level of like sex workers, right? Like if someone sees me posting my genitals, they might think that like, and I'm okay with them like talking about or fetishizing my genitals, they might think that like all sex workers are okay with that. And I think that would be like a more likely interpretation than thinking that all trans people are.
Yeah, so I think...
Sorry, just before that, I just wanted to say thank you, Kidnotkin, for the raid, and guys, consider subscribing. I do this like 6 to 7 days a week. And then there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot what it was. Sorry. Go ahead.
I have to think about it. I think that there's like there should be like, I think that when people do that kind of stuff, there's like not really regard of how that affects the greater trans community. I would say like I'm against porn in general. I think porn is harmful and regressive and it's just not good. But I'm more specifically against like trans porn specifically because it's first of all, like a lot of the slurs, like I don't want to say them, but like the T slur and the S slur, I guess, blink male, you know what I'm talking about? Those stem from like trans porn communities. It builds a community where it's like people don't see us as human beings. But they see as like it basically treats trans people like freak shows and weirdos. Like I understand it's probably evolved since then, but it's more like a novelty. And it's like I don't like people viewing trans people that way. I don't like people viewing trans people as like sexual beings for the parts that we are dysphoric for. Like essentially, porn, it's like a glorification of like a showing off certain parts of your body. When it's like, as a trans person, like the definition of being trans is you are dysphoric about this stuff. You want to change this part of your body and hopefully, you know, fix your body to become like a cis woman's. And so I see that. And I think like, that's just not good for a trans person at all. And I don't want people to see that and like think all of these things about trans people. I know that it's just not good for trans people. And I hate this culture of it.
I think it's kind of like a video games are the cause of violence argument where you're like, looking at media and you're extrapolating and saying that like, well, because like things are presented in one way, like there's pornography that's like very violent towards women, right? It's like BDSM pornography. But I think we should be able to like trust people in like a just society to be able to differentiate between the media they consume and real life. When someone is in Call of Duty and they like murder 26 people on a kill spree, I think we need to trust people to recognize that like they don't exist in Call of Duty and that like, you know, there are games where you can kill people and that's okay, and people are able to differentiate between, you know, the media they consume and real life. And I think pornography is the same way. I think that there are ways to consume pornography that are unhealthy for the individual. So like there are ways to consume cake that's unhealthy for the individual. There are ways to consume alcohol that's unhealthy for the individual. And yet we allow people to consume cake and to consume alcohol. And so, you know, I fall maybe more on the libertarian side of these things, but I think that people, you know, we have to trust people to be able to do with their body what they will without, you know, involving other people unconsensually. And we have to trust people to consume things in a safe way. And if you believe that like people are taking something away from media that's not good, then you also need to like talk to them, right? And just be like, hey, I don't believe that like you should dehumanize trans women, which obviously I believe. And like, I personally don't use some of these words that you're talking about because I think that like, you know, I'm not interested in like veering into that arena.
Yeah, I under. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna bring up also, you know, we there are plenty of like teenage girls who and boys who have body dysmorphia who still end up posting their images on Instagram and the like, posting their bikini photos on Instagram and TikTok and things like that, right? So
think that there maybe should be like special restrictions. Like obviously there's already special restrictions for pornography. You can't post pornography if you're under 18. But also with like Instagram use for like teenagers, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's probably harmful to mental health. So I think when we talk about minors, you know, we can have a lot more restrictions on these sorts of things.
Yeah, I just want to say I think it is a lot different in this instance. Like when you're talking about like bikini photos, like being dysphoric about like or not liking your body, than like actually having a body part that shouldn't be there. I think that's different. And when Taft AJ mentioned, what did she mention? Something about comparing like the dysphoria to video games. Yeah, video games. I don't buy that like comparison. I think that when a trans person is posting pre-op parts to the internet, that's not the same as a video game where it's like clearly obvious to the person that like this is not like real life, no one's actually being harmed, but this is a trans person choosing to present themselves in this very way that like promotes misconceptions about trans people, and in my opinion causes societal harm that we see in the way that people treat trans people. And I don't like it. It makes it difficult for trans women just looking for genuine relationships. And I do think that there's like societal harm here. This isn't really helping. I think it's hurting trans people. And like I said, we're supposed to be dysphoric over these parts, not like posting them all over the internet. So I would say that like I don't like seeing people do that. It genuinely bothers me. Like it.
So this is kind of what I was trying to say. I didn't mean to say that like you haven't thought about this issue. What I'm saying is that like the way that you're thinking about this issue is like you're responding, like you're taking your emotional and like your personal response to Taftaj's content and like content like that. You're making like an observation about the way trans women are treated in society and some of the challenges that they face and stuff. And you're like associating these two things where there's not actually like any real connective tissue, because the people consuming a lot of this content probably aren't the ones that are also like perpetuating harmful legislation and stereotypes and stuff against trans people. And this is like, you know, a white cis male, like fucking piping up in a conversation about trans culture between two trans women. So feel free to tell me to shut the fuck up. But I was here before you.
No, I'm not saying you can't speak on that. I never said that, but okay.
No, I'm just kidding, guys. It's all good.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely say like this is something that impacts me personally, so I feel like I have a right to like comment about it.
I didn't say you didn't have a right to comment on it. I think you have a right to comment on anything and everything. Like, please don't ever take anything I'm saying to mean that like you should shut the fuck up and sit down. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm only like adding my 2 cents because I am like here having this conversation with you. I've watched you have a few other conversations, and I noticed like that there seems to be like a theme where like you make a statement and then like, you know, some other person has like a very, very different interpretation of it than you do internally, and you kind of like have to walk through what you mean in real time. So
I got you.
Rose, the reason I bring up video games is to point out that sometimes there are scenes depicted in media that depict actions that we wouldn't want people to engage in real life. So like if there's BDSM porn that portrays like violence against women, or it's like scenario where it's like casual, like free use, and like a woman is like engaging in sex publicly or something. That's not something that we want to like have people doing in real life. We don't want people going up to women in real life and like trying to have sex with them or being like violent towards them in a sexual way. Yeah. So that would be bad, right? And yet I think it's okay if there's pornography that depicts these scenes, because I trust people to be able to differentiate between pornography and real life in the same way that I trust people to differentiate between video games and real life. And so when we have trans women who, you know, show their body parts on the internet, I'm trusting that people don't think, well, because this person is showing their body parts on the internet, I can go up and like look at their body parts in real life, or like, you know, start asking them questions about their body parts in real life. So I'm trusting people are able to differentiate between like the internet, where people are choosing to post themselves, they're engaging in that consensually, and going up to someone and interrogating them about their body. So that's sort of, that's the analogy.
Can I ask after?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the question that I had was like back to something that you mentioned just a couple minutes ago, that you would potentially be in favor of like specific restrictions for minors' participation on like social media and things like that, because you think that like, obviously I think I've heard of some of the studies too about the negative impact that Instagram and social media outlets at large are having on like young psyches and stuff. But I don't think that effect necessarily like drops off at age 18, or that we suddenly become more like immediately or spontaneously more cognitively capable of like assessing what we're looking at and like taking a more like sober view of it once we turn 18. Like, where's the age of majority like factor into your like trust that people are going to like consume and interpret your content the right way, but that like, how does that mesh with 17, 16-year-olds maybe needing to be restricted from social media because they're not like interpreting the content they're consuming in a mature way?
Yeah. So as far as I know, the literature that we have is really focused around teen girls. So as far as I know, there isn't a lot of literature to suggest that like adults who engage in social media use have the same kind of effects. I think it's really like with puberty development and the emotions, you know, involved in that, you really see this effect magnified. So that's one thing. But like the second thing is, I think that the issue is really like when it comes to adults, more the mechanisms, the algorithms behind social media that are causing some of these bad effects. So I think that like if you were to change, for example, like systems, right? Or like hiding likes might be like a way to solve this. But I don't think that like actually, I think posting itself can be something that people can engage in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. And so I think that like it's wrong to just say that like all self-posting is bad. And we appeal to like the negative effects it might have on an individual. Whether it's bad or not really depends on like how they engage with it. And so like I'm trusting that I think adults have more responsibility for how they engage with it. And if they choose to engage with it in a bad way, that's probably, you know, I think that's their right. Whereas I think with children and minors, society takes like a special moral responsibility for ensuring that they're not engaging with things in a negative way.
Yeah, but we also draw very arbitrary lines all across like those societal barriers about like at what age you can start participating in like X, Y, and Z activities, because we've determined that your brain is at like such and such developmental stage. You know, consuming certain illicit substances isn't a privilege that comes along with the age of majority, for instance.
But it is like it's a somewhat arbitrary line, right? And like there are going to be some people who are like 26 and are not emotionally mature enough to engage in like posting themselves on the internet in a way that's healthy. And there are going to be some people who are 16 and that is going to be like something that they can engage with in a healthy way. So I think that like we just have to like make a line somewhere. And I think that like
that's a fair answer.
Yeah, I think the line that we've taken in society is that like we have a special responsibility for people under 18. And so that's what I would go with.
Yeah, if I can
Okay,
just make
that's
a
fair.
quick...
Yeah, go ahead, Star.
Oh,
And
sorry.
then I want to speak after.
It's a little bit unrelated, but I have to announce it because it's important. So Keffels the other day, and she's been continuing to say this about me, how I platform. I'm so easy to. It's so easy for me to platform, neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but how, God forbid I platform any trans people, or interact with any trans content creators. Can I just say, okay, that I interact with trans content creators far more often than I interact with white supremacists. Can we confirm that right now? So, and also right now, if anybody's doing if she wants to make that irresponsible platform argument, she's talking to the quartering right now. So, who's the one doing irresponsible platforming?
I think she just doesn't like you. Like,
yeah.
A lot of these attacks just come down to like, do I like the person? If I like them, I'm going to find like ways to excuse their behavior. Yeah. If I don't, I'm going to find ways to attack them.
Yeah, can I respond? I've been kind of waiting
go
to
ahead,
say
go ahead.
For a long
and
time.
Black Yamato,
So,
I added you in chat. If you can just respond to me. Sorry, go ahead, Rose.
So I wanted to mention the video games thing because you made that comparison, like how video games are like not real life and people can make a difference. So I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think about like video games that depict like violent rape and like sexualize women in very like skimpy outfits and like not treat them the same way that they treat men? Do you think that that's fine too because they're just not like real life? It doesn't make like any difference that they could just do whatever they want and like depict like the worst kind of things. I mean, that's what Gamergate was all about, saying that like actually like you know what I'm saying? Like
I think people should be able to make the media that they want to and consume it. And I think that like art is subversive and like there are movies like Clockwork Orange, which are like incredibly violent, but like, I don't think it's our business to be like regulating art.
Okay, but can you not also acknowledge that like these depictions do impact real life like events? Like it does change the way that people view things in like real life. Like it does make an impact and it does make a difference. Like I think it's silly to say like the way that we've depicted women in video games has no effect at all.
No, I don't think so. Because I don't think that like people are going to watch Clockwork Orange and then be like, oh, rape is okay, and then like engage in rape. I don't think that relationship like is strong. I think that like if you force someone to like watch Clockwork Orange like from a young age maybe and like only watch that movie over and over and over, like maybe you might cause like them trauma, but that's like
like a scene in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think you can like mess with people's brains by like extreme or like forced exposure to things, but I think that like if someone's brain is wired in such a way that they're willing to engage in violence and rape, I think that like that's probably already the case before they see violent media. And
we've also done like pretty extensive studies to try to draw some connection between like the consumption of violent media and violent behaviors IRL, and the evidence is pretty much not existent. Like there's obviously like some studies out there that will make draw some loose connections, but the vast majority of the data seems to agree that there's almost no relationship between like amount of video games that you play and the likelihood of you committing an act of violence in the real world. So when you say like, don't you think this is true, you're making a claim that's been like empirically tested, and you need to be able to cite some kind of information to support that claim if you're going to make it from like an authoritative place.
Thank you guys for the gifted subs and for the bits, by the way.
I don't think that video games or violent media makes people violent. I think what it is some people like have like issues, and they use that media to use that media to like enact like their type of violent tendencies. This argument sounds like it's like the whole video games made me commit the crime thing, and I think that's like a pretty like old argument for people who just don't want to take responsibility.
I just changed my title to Stardust with Consent, Weaponizing Trans Identities in order to defeat Keffels right now. I hope that's okay.
Wow. That's good, yeah. Use me as a pawn, Stardust.
Thanks.
It's not just good, it's accurate. So keep up the
good work. It
work.
is accurate, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Portland, for gifting a tier 1 sub, by the way. Right. Clockwork Orange. Does that have a lot of violence against women in it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I never saw that.
I've never seen that either, so I don't know.
It also has a, you know, fairly iconic like conditioning scenes where like people have their eyelids suspended open and are forced to watch like horrible imagery for, you know, certain amounts of time to like warp their psyche. And it was just kind of ironic the way she phrased like, oh, well, if you Clockwork Orange somebody with Clockwork Orange, it was like, yeah, no, that would definitely fuck somebody up. But
like, do you think movies like Saw, like, or like more like movies like Saw can like alter someone's perception of like of reality and stuff?
Probably not. On an individual basis, maybe.
I think the chance of this is like extremely low, and like the vast majority of people who consume media like Saw are consuming it in like a responsible way that is not going to damage them. And so I think it's like, I brought this up where like you can consume alcohol in like much more irresponsible ways, but we don't ban alcohol. And you can consume cake in like very irresponsible ways, like destroy your long-term health. And yet we don't ban cake. We trust most people to engage with these things in a responsible way. And we accept that people have like a freedom to even engage with these things to an extent in an irresponsible way. Like you can gorge yourself on cake and it's not healthy, but like you have the right to do that. And so I think that like when it comes to media that is violent, there's probably like some portion of the population, like a tiny portion, that is going to see violent media and like maybe it makes them more violent. Like I think that those people can hypothetically exist, but I think that the societal cost of restricting speech in such a way, like cater to this narrow group of people, is destructive. And it creates these censorship boards that like really suppress freedom of expression and creativity. And so I think that like when we talk about pornography, and this is like how it began with like talking about trans pornography, is there maybe like the occasional person who like looks at like a trans woman on the internet, sees that she's naked and thinks that like, oh, this means like all trans people are like, or most trans people are comfortable with like being talked to about their genitals or being like, you know, fondled or like, you know, engaged with in a sexual way. Do I think that that person could exist? Yeah, I think that person could exist. But I think that like when you ask people to surround and cater society around this tiny portion of people that might act irresponsibly, what you do is you massively restrict freedom and creativity. And so I think that's the problem here. And I think that like a society, you know, I think there are better ways to like discourage people from engaging in like bad behavior than banning art itself. And so like I think having laws against rape and murder and like ways for police to investigate that and giving people the right to self-defense, those are things that discourage people from engaging in rape and murder when they know that they're going to face repercussions either in the self-defense realm or from the government if they engage with it. And so, or, you know, on the trans pornography realm, if you go out and you tell people, I don't think you should sexualize trans women, I don't think you should like fondle trans women, I don't think you should ask them about their genitals, etc. I think that's the appropriate response to seeing people, you know, who might do this thing, not banning the art itself.
Yeah, I mean, we've had plenty of time and plenty of opportunity to study the statistical, like the societal relationship between consumption of mature content, like adults only content, and like the societal impact that it has at large. And I mean, it's been a conservative talking point, you know, we're rotting our children's brains with like porn and video games and stuff for a very long time now, but the vast majority of the like studies attempting to actually like draw some kind of causal relationship between the two, like there isn't any. You are always going to be able to point to like narrow edge cases where like this person played X amount of video games and they also went on a shooting spree or whatever, but you're not going to be able to, at least like according to the evidence we have so far, you're not going to be able to find any like larger societal trend towards violence based on like the availability of violent video games. Those two aren't related on like a societal level in any way that you'll be able to measure objectively. And so it's all just kind of like fear mongering to say that they're like closely related and that violent video games are like causing this degenerative effect on society, or like any of the other topics that we just mentioned. So I don't think the connective tissue's there.
I think one of the problems that minorities have that are affected by adult content, right, is the fetishization of like particular group of people. I think that's a real problem when we talk about like when we talk about adult content. But I don't think there's like I think there's people that like see these groups of people and like see them for like the acts that they do. I think that's a small amount of people. But there is like a fetishization problem that does go on with particular groups, and I think we should like at least acknowledge that.
I sort of disagree. I think that like exposure to, minority groups is ultimately a good thing. And I think that if you were to say like ban pornography with like Black women or trans women in it, I think that that's very dangerous because there's a lot of things that can be categorized as pornography. And I think it'd be a massive like overstepping of the government if you were like looking at like every Black woman's like Instagram and being like, well, is this bikini like too risque to the point where like maybe some people are going to fetishize it? I think it's just like, I mean, I agree that like fetishization can happen. I think maybe I would just say that like the approach to curtailing it is definitely not to ban the content or to like tell people not to produce the content. I think that like the approach is to have like broader discussions about fetishization.
Okay, I just want to say, like, I'm not in any way saying that it should be illegal. Like, I think it's harmful, but like, I think like making it illegal, like, it's just going to cause like a lot more harm than anything. I guess my advice would just be like letting people know that this is a thing and like discouraging people from doing that. Like, I that's the thing. It's like it's hard because it's like I understand. Like, I don't want to be the person that says to people like, "Oh, you need to stop doing this," because I understand. Like, I am.
You are that person.
Yeah, I know. And I completely get it. It's like I know it's an uncomfortable position to be put in, but at the same time, it's like I can't deny that as a transgender woman who's affected by this stuff, I do feel like this is harmful, and I do feel like this is having a negative impact. So I would like to, I guess spread the word and be like, encourage, I guess, like not that. I it's tricky. I don't know how to properly say this because it's like, I don't want it to be outright banned, but I'd much prefer if people stop doing it, stop glorifying it. So I don't know.
I think so I kind of run into a similar issue when we talk about like plastic surgery and things like that and like body modification. Where, I do think like too much of it can be harmful to women overall, right? We're already kind of trying to fit into a very narrow expectation for us. Which, I mean, to be fair, it's widened in recent decades, but it's still pretty narrow. So I do run into that issue where I feel like we've got this very narrow expectation that we're supposed to fit into, and if we don't fit into it, then it can be you're basically invisible. At the same time, I still think that like bodily autonomy is like number one, right? And that should be somebody's choice at the end of the day, what they do with their body. But somebody did have a question for you, Rose. They said they asked, since Rose is anti-genitals before bottom surgery, she says, if you want to see trans people be treated on the same level as cis people, doesn't that mean to acknowledge there are trans women who don't have bottom dysphoria or have those parts and are okay with them?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say I'm like anti-porn altogether. I'm just like super anti like pre-op trans porn. I understand like not like, okay, to me having bottom dysphoria is like such an essential part to me being trans that like I couldn't understand how someone could be trans and not. I'm not saying that those people aren't trans, okay? Before anyone says that, that's not what I'm saying, right? I understand that people can be. It just confuses me because it's like I don't get how someone could feel that because it's like so. it's always been such a thing for me. And like when it comes to like the definitions of being trans and stuff, it's like you would think that someone who's transgender, a trans woman, would have like a lot of dysphoria and wouldn't want to do these kinds of things. I understand, like, I want trans women to be treated the same as cis women. But that's like saying, like, I want cis women to be, or trans women to be seen in the same way as cis women. And pre-op trans porn does not view trans women in the same way as cis women. It has people view them completely differently. And that's the problem. When people
I don't think that's true. I think that, like, porn sees women in like a myriad of ways, and porn sees trans women in a myriad of ways. Like, it depends really on the specific producer and the specific person in pornography. And like when people choose to present themselves in a certain way, like they're okay with presenting themselves in that way. And so I think that like it depends on the pornography that you're looking at. But like, moreover, like there are trans women and trans men without any dysphoria at all. So like, I don't think that like dysphoria is a necessary precondition to be trans in general, much less like a specific kind of dysphoria.
Yeah, I'm a trans medicalist. I do believe that like dysphoria is like pretty necessary, but also it's like, it's weird because I believe that, but at the same time I see people who like, you know, dress very feminine and clearly identify as a woman. So it's like, I don't know if like putting like, I used to be very clear cut, but I've seen enough examples online, so it's like I don't know exactly if I can like so simply say like who isn't trans. But like I do genuinely believe that it's important to have like a desire to transition, like have hormones, want the surgery, not always get the surgery, because I understand there's a lot of reasons why someone couldn't be able to do that. I just think that a desire to want to transition and having dysphoria for certain body parts is like pretty like necessary. I mean, I'm not saying you're not trans if you don't have those things, but it's like when it comes to being trans, it's like very important. It's like a huge part of it, you know?
I mean, I think those are huge parts of having gender identity disorder or gender identity dysphoria, is having dysphoria. So like, I just think it's important to recognize that within any group, there's a lot of people who have different feelings on different things. Like, I'm dysphoric about certain aspects of my body, like my height. But I don't think that, like, if a trans woman is my height and not dysphoric about her height, I don't think that makes her, like, less trans than me. I think or less dysphoric than me. I think that it maybe means that she has dysphoria about different things. And so I think that, like, within any group, you have to acknowledge that there's, like, a variety of differences. And also, you know, not only that, but you can have people who are dysphoric about body parts. For example, like, you can be dysphoric about your shoulders and still want to post pictures of yourself on the internet that include your shoulders in them. And I think by, you know, posting pictures of your shoulders, I don't think that people can reasonably assume that, like, one, you're not dysphoric about your shoulders at all, because if you were dysphoric, you would hide them, like, forever. Or that just because one person is okay with posting their shoulders, that, like, you know, it's okay to, like, compliment trans women, all trans women, on, like, how wide their shoulders are. I think that would be, like, a kind of silly extrapolation from that as well. So I think that, like, you know, however you slice it, you have to recognize that there's just, like, there's so much nuance in the conversation, and you can't really label people as, like, trans or not trans, dysphoric or not dysphoric, based on posting pictures of themselves.
Hold on. So I want to say, first of all, I think I'm a trans woman. I'm super dysphoric about my height as well. Okay. I hate it. I'm like 6'1". I wish I was like 5'1" or something, or maybe like 6 inches shorter. I think height is definitely different from bottom dysphoria though. Like I get that, like some, like there's tall women out there. Some like trans women, like being tall, like being models. I like being small and petite. I wish I was. I'm not, sadly. But like, I don't think that that's like, if someone's not dysphoric about their height, that doesn't make that be silly to say that. I think when it comes to bottom dysphoria, I mean, this is like clearly like an aspect of like, you know, being a trans woman. It's much more of a defining aspect than height is. So I think it's a very different thing. Also, I'm not saying that like trans women shouldn't ever post pictures about themselves. Like if a trans woman's posting a picture about herself, she's going to make herself look the most feminine as possible, make her look as comfortable as possible. I'm not saying that like non-passing trans women or like trans women who like are dysphoric shouldn't post pictures of themselves. That's silly. But when it comes to like posting like pre-op parts,
but you are saying that if someone posts a picture of their shoulders, you would be able to tell that they're not dysphoric about those shoulders based on your logic about posting pictures of your genitals, which I think is, I think that's a ridiculous standard, because you can be dysphoric about something and still show it online.
I think that's very different though. Like I like having dysphoria over shoulders versus having like bottom dysphoria. Like those are two very different things. Like obviously if you have shoulder dysphoria, you're probably not going to go out of your way to show your shoulders like openly. But if you do, it's like whatever. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. But if somebody is a transgender woman and shows those pre-op parts online for the world to see, that is like a very, very different
But
thing.
you acknowledge that someone can be dysphoric about a body part and still post pictures of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely that like someone who's dysphoric about their shoulders is going to show a bunch of pictures about their shoulders and sell them online for money or whatever. That doesn't seem very likely.
But if someone was paying like a $10,000 a month to like see a trans woman's shoulders and she's dysphoric about it, I mean, do you think that like if she posted pictures of her shoulders, that would mean that she's not dysphoric? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, like, okay, when we're talking about, see, this is where the money part comes in. Like, that just makes me sad, though. Like basically, like making yourself uncomfortable for money. Like, that's just not a position that someone should be put in. Like, that's just
you
so
can be dysphoric about something and not be uncomfortable with posting it online. I think that's what I'm trying to hammer home. Is that like you can say I am not a fan of my height or my shoulders or whatever, but there are people who do appreciate that, and I'm grateful that there are people who can appreciate it, and I enjoy like having people out there who are able to appreciate parts of me that personally I'm not a fan of.
Guys, I just want to say Portland is Burning has to drop off, but he says that he appreciates hanging with everybody here, and that he'll be on a Wix or Death of Certainty's panel on Friday about marijuana at 6 p.m. on Friday. So I'll plug his channel for you guys. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Might hop off as well then.
Great debate. I guess we're finishing things up here for the most part, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it was a nice conversation.
It was fun. Thanks, Stardust.
Yeah, didn't expect everyone to join in, but hey, I'm open for surprises.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Thought it was super hella based, and super fun, and we should do more of these.
Thank you. Yeah, we should. Yeah. Absolutely. I guess I'm just gonna head out unless we're doing closing statements. I guess we're not.
I don't think we are. Yeah. Have a good one though. I'll plug you as well. In the chat, your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, I'll link it here.
Okay.
Go ahead and follow me. Thanks for having me on, Star.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad that we're still on good terms and that you're see, this is why I like you. People say controversial things, but you're still willing to talk to them. And in the sense of being nice to people, I think that's way more helpful.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a ton.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Have a good one. I'll see you later.
You too.
Bye.
I'll see you later. Talk to you on Thursday, right?
Yeah, Thursday. Yeah. I'll see you then.
Okay, cool. See you. Bye.
See ya.